People say time reveals true friends, but for me, it took a broken hip and a forged signature. I thought my neighbor was helping me recover. She said, "You can trust me with the paperwork." I didn't know those words would cost me my home until I learned my husband had one last plan to protect me from her. I never thought betrayal could sound polite. There was a gentleness in Lydia's voice that could soften any blow, a tone so practiced, so effortlessly kind, it could almost make a lie sound like love. "Don't worry, Margaret," she said, resting her hand lightly on my shoulder as we reached my porch steps. "You just focus on getting better. I'll take care of everything else." Her words came like a bomb in the early weeks after my hip surgery. I was fragile, physically, yes, but more so emotionally. Losing my independence had made me feel like a burden, and Lydia seemed to sense that vulnerability before I ever said a word. She was always there, carrying my groceries, sorting my mail, making sure I didn't overexert myself. The neighbors would watch from across the street and whisper, "That Lydia is a saint. Margaret's lucky to have her." Lucky. I used to believe that. At first, it was small acts of kindness. She'd bring over soup in a blue porcelain bowl, the same kind she knew I liked. She'd water the flowers on the porch, hum hymns while sweeping the steps. She'd say things like, "You don't need to lift a finger. Let me handle the boring stuff." And I let her, not out of laziness, but because it felt nice to be cared for again. It had been a long time since anyone had done that for me. After my husband, Thomas, passed away 5 years ago, I had learned to live alone. The house was quiet, but full of memories, his pipe still resting in the corner of the study, his old armchair untouched by time. Some nights, I'd catch myself setting out 2 plates for dinner before remembering there was no one else coming. So when Lydia started spending her evenings with me, talking about her garden or the church committee or the gossip around town, it filled a silence I'd long grown used to. We'd known each other for 20 years. She'd helped me through Thomas's funeral, stayed overnight when I got pneumonia, even drove me to my physical therapy appointments. So when she started managing my errands, it didn't feel strange. It felt natural, comforting, even. I remember the first time she brought over a stack of mail. She flipped through it with the precision of someone used to handling other people's business. "These are just bills," she said, setting them aside. "And here," she continued, holding up an envelope, "looks like something from the tax office. Don't worry, I'll handle it." I hesitated. "Oh, that's all right, I can—" "Nonsense," she interrupted. "You shouldn't strain your back with all this paperwork. That's what friends are for." I smiled, letting her take it. I didn't even question it. After all, Lydia had never given me a reason not to trust her. But looking back, that's when the shift began, so subtle I couldn't have noticed if I tried. She stopped asking to help and started telling me what she would do. "You don't need to go to the bank," she'd say. "I can deposit the checks for you. I already spoke with your doctor," she'd mention casually. "I told him you're too tired for another visit." At first, I told myself she was being protective. But then I began to feel something unfamiliar, a faint, uneasy tug every time she used the word we. "We decided this was best. We're handling it now. We'll take care of it." Somehow, without realizing it, I had been erased from my own life. The day everything started to unravel was ordinary in every sense, the kind of quiet morning where the sunlight falls across the kitchen table just right, and the kettle hums while you wait for it to boil. Lydia was already at my house, sorting through mail again. I was sitting by the window, watching the magnolia blossoms sway in the breeze. Then I heard her say, "Don't worry, Margaret. You can trust me with the paperwork." Her tone was the same, sweet, confident, final. But something about it felt heavier that morning. Maybe it was the way she didn't look at me when she said it. Maybe it was the way her hand hovered just a little too long over the envelope with my property documents. Whatever it was, my chest tightened. "Paperwork?" I asked. She smiled, not missing a beat. "Oh, just property tax renewals. You'll be getting notices soon, but it's all routine. You just sign where I mark." "Of course," I murmured, forcing a smile. She set a pen on the table, the kind of cheap blue pen you find in offices. I picked it up, my hand trembling slightly, and signed. At that moment, I thought I was signing another year of security, another small task off my list. But what I was really signing was the beginning of a slow, quiet betrayal. 3 months later, when the letter arrived from the county, the return address nearly made my heart stop. It wasn't addressed to Margaret Gray, homeowner of 412 Maple Lane. It was addressed to Lydia Properties, LLC, and beneath that, in small print, was my address, my land, my home, my life. The letter began with just 4 words. Transfer of ownership confirmed. I read that line over and over again, my fingers gripping the paper until it crumpled. I could still hear Lydia's voice echoing in my mind, soft, sweet, and poisonous. You can trust me with the paperwork. That's the moment I learned that sometimes betrayal doesn't scream. Sometimes it smiles. I met Lydia long before either of us had gray hair. She just moved to town after her husband passed, and we found each other at Sunday service, 2 women trying to fill the quiet that grief leaves behind. She was bright, talkative, and funny in that disarming way that made people feel like they'd known her for years. I remember thinking how lucky I was to find someone who understood loneliness without needing to talk about it. We became inseparable. Summers were spent in the garden, gossiping over iced tea, while winters found us knitting by the fire, watching the snow pile up against the porch. When Thomas was alive, he used to joke, "You and Lydia are like a pair of hens that never stop clucking." I'd just laugh. After he passed, it was Lydia who filled that empty chair beside me. She cooked for me when I couldn't bring myself to eat, called every morning to make sure I'd gotten out of bed, and came by every Sunday just to make sure I didn't turn into a hermit. When I slipped and broke my hip last spring, Lydia was the first one at the hospital. She brought flowers, arranged my discharge, and said with a smile, "You'll come stay with me while you recover. I won't take no for an answer." And truthfully, I didn't want to. It felt comforting to know someone cared that much. Her house was tidy and cheerful, smelling faintly of lavender and lemon polish. She made sure my favorite armchair was set up by the window and cooked all my meals from scratch. For the first few weeks, I felt safe, even grateful. When she insisted on collecting my mail, I told her she was a blessing. When she started organizing my bills, I thought she was just being thoughtful. But slowly, I began to notice how much of my life she was managing, and how little she let me manage myself. It began with my mail. "No need to get up," she'd say, already sorting through it before I could reach the table. Then my phone calls. "You need rest," she'd remind me, silencing the ringer and telling visitors I was too tired. At first, it seemed harmless, protective even. But over time, it felt less like help and more like control. When she started mentioning things about my finances, I felt a flicker of unease. "You shouldn't stress over bills," she'd say. "I'll take care of them." She even offered to merge my small savings account with hers, just for convenience. I laughed it off. "I think I'll keep things as they are," I said. Her smile tightened just slightly, but she didn't press it. Not then. Still, the dependency was growing, and she knew it. She made herself the center of every decision, until even the smallest acts, paying a bill, answering a letter, required her involvement. And I foolishly let her, because she had been my friend for 20 years, because she had held my hand at funerals and sat by my bedside when I was sick, because when you've spent enough time alone, you start to mistake control for care. One afternoon, she brought me a stack of envelopes and a pen. "These are just insurance renewals and property forms," she said, her tone casual. "Routine stuff. You can sign them now, and I'll drop them off." The papers looked complicated, long paragraphs of fine print, and numbers. I squinted at one line that mentioned temporary authorization, but she waved it off. "Oh, that's just a formality," she said. "They make everything sound scarier than it is." I hesitated. "Shouldn't I read these properly?" She laughed, a warm, familiar laugh that had always made me feel silly for worrying. "Margaret, you think I'd ever trick you?" Her words hit me like a gentle scolding. I smiled weakly, embarrassed for even asking, and signed where she pointed. Weeks passed. She continued handling everything with perfect confidence, paying bills, returning calls, telling neighbors I was doing just fine. She started making comments about my land, little things that only struck me later. "You don't really need all that acreage anymore," she'd say. "Imagine how much easier life would be in a smaller place." I thought she was just making conversation. But now, I can see how carefully she was laying the groundwork. Then came the phone calls. Hushed, secretive, always ending the moment I entered the room. "Who was that?" I'd ask. "Oh, just my cousin from real estate," she'd say lightly. I brushed it off. Lydia had family everywhere, or so she claimed. But something about the way she said real estate lingered in my mind like a shadow. One afternoon, while she was out running errands, I wandered to her desk looking for a notepad. I wasn't snooping, not really, just looking for something to write down a grocery list. But there, half tucked under a pile of letters, was an open envelope addressed to Lydia Properties, LLC. The return address caught my attention, the county registrar's office. Curious, I pulled it out and began to read. By the second line, my breath caught in my throat. Transfer of ownership. Parcel number 3247, Margaret Gray residence. Completed and verified. At first, I thought it must have been a clerical error. My land was under my name, had been for 40 years. Lydia's company, whatever that even was, had nothing to do with it. But the next page ended any doubt. It listed the previous owner, Margaret Gray, and beneath it, the new registered owner, Lydia Properties, LLC. There it was in black and white. The land where Thomas and I had planted our garden. The house where we built our life. Gone. I felt dizzy, gripping the edge of the desk for balance. I stared at her company's name again, not wanting to believe what I was reading. Somewhere in the back of my mind, Lydia's laugh echoed. Margaret, you think I'd ever trick you? I wanted to believe that question was still rhetorical. But deep down, I already knew the answer. That evening, I sat in Lydia's kitchen, staring at her across the table as the scent of her famous beef stew filled the room. It was the same meal she'd made for me every Sunday since I'd moved in, but that night, it tasted different, like it was laced with something I couldn't name. My spoon hovered over the bowl as I replayed every detail of the letter in my mind. Every forged signature, every comforting lie that now felt like poison. I looked at her carefully. She seemed so calm, humming softly while wiping down the counter, like someone who had nothing to hide. But when I finally spoke, her hand froze mid-motion. Lydia, I said quietly, I got a letter from the county today. She turned, her face the picture of concern. Oh, something wrong. I held her gaze. It mentioned a property transfer. My property. To a company called Lydia Properties, LLC. For a split second, barely a flicker, her eyes widened. Then she smiled, that same warm, maternal smile she always used. Oh, that. It's just temporary, dear. You don't need to worry about that. It's only so I can manage the taxes while you recover. I set my spoon down carefully. You transferred my land to your company? She exhaled dramatically, as though I were a stubborn child. Margaret, you're still healing. You can't handle all that right now. I'm doing this for your own good. It's called being practical. The way she said practical made my stomach twist. You forged my signature, I said softly. She tilted her head, feigning confusion. Oh, come now. You signed everything yourself. Remember those papers? You wanted me to take care of the details. My throat tightened. You told me they were insurance forms. Her tone sharpened just slightly. And what's the difference, really? I've been looking after you for months. I've spent my time, my energy, my money keeping this place running. Don't I deserve a little protection too? That's when I saw it, the flicker of truth behind her eyes. She wasn't sorry. She was proud. Protection? I asked. You mean ownership? Her lips curled into a smirk. You wouldn't understand the paperwork, anyway. And besides, you should be grateful, Margaret. If it weren't for me, you'd be drowning in debt by now. Grateful. That word again. It hung in the air between us like a slap. She picked up her wine glass and swirled it lazily, her tone suddenly lighter. You're not getting any younger, dear. You can't expect to manage everything forever. I'm just thinking ahead. Thinking ahead. Of course she was. I pushed my chair back, the sound echoing in the quiet kitchen. You're stealing from me, Lydia. Her smile never wavered. I'm saving you from yourself. I didn't say another word. I just sat there, hands trembling beneath the table, pretending to finish my meal. When she finally excused herself for bed, I waited, listening to the creak of her footsteps fade down the hall, the soft click of her bedroom door, the muffled hum of the radio she always left on. Then I stood up. The air felt heavy as I walked toward her office, the one room she always kept locked. But I'd noticed weeks ago that she hid the key behind a framed photo of her late husband. I found it, easily slid it into the lock, and pushed the door open. The room smelled of perfume and old paper. On the desk sat neatly stacked folders, each labeled with a name: Mr. Henson, Mrs. Crane, Margaret Gray. My name. My hands shook as I pulled my folder open. Inside were copies of my deed, tax forms, and financial records. All had my signature. Or something meant to look like it. The slant was wrong, the spacing off, but it was close enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. And beneath it all was a printed email chain, with a realtor. My heart stopped when I saw the subject line. Offer accepted, Maple Lane property. She had already sold it. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to sit down. My home, my land, the place where Thomas and I built our life, was gone, signed away in lies and greed. Then, buried under the stack, I found something else. A handwritten note. Lydia's handwriting, addressed to a Mr. Collins. It read, "Once she moves to my house, permanently, the rest of her estate will be easier to transition. The key is to keep her dependent." I froze. The key is to keep her dependent. Those words repeated in my head until I could barely breathe. Every kind gesture, every soft word, every cup of soup. It had all been strategy. She hadn't been helping me heal. She'd been tightening a leash around my life, one favor at a time. I grabbed my cane, steadied myself, and took the folder. All of it. My name, my proof, my escape. The next morning, I called my family lawyer, Mr. Allen, the same man who had handled Thomas's estate years ago. His voice on the phone was calm, professional, but I could hear the disbelief behind it. She did what? She transferred my property to her company. Sold it, I think. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Mrs. Gray, I need you to come in tomorrow. Bring every document she ever gave you." I agreed. When Lydia came downstairs later that morning, she smiled as if nothing had happened. "I was thinking we could sort through your jewelry today," she said. I looked at her and returned the same calm smile she'd worn for months. "That sounds nice," I said sweetly. Let her think she still had control. Let her think I was weak. Because by the time she realized what was really happening, it would be far too late. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't tired. I was awake. And so was the part of me that Lydia had counted on staying asleep. The part that still knew how to fight back. By dawn, I was already dressed and waiting by the window, a small suitcase by my feet. Lydia was still asleep. I could hear the faint rhythm of her snoring through the thin hallway wall. For a moment, I just stood there, watching the first streaks of light paint the horizon, feeling that strange mix of fear and relief that comes right before you take your life back. When the taxi pulled into the driveway, I moved quietly, every step deliberate. I left a note on the kitchen table, just 2 words, doctor's appointment. It wasn't a lie. I just didn't specify what kind of doctor I was seeing. The driver helped me into the car, and as we pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of Lydia's house through the window. Curtains drawn, flowers trimmed, everything perfectly in place. A stage set for a life built on pretense. For the first time, it didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like a trap I had finally crawled out of. When I walked into Mr. Allen's office, his secretary blinked in surprise. "Mrs. Gray, it's been years." "Yes," I said, clutching my bag. "But I think my husband's old deeds just saved me." Mr. Allen ushered me into his office immediately. He was an older man now, gray around the temples, same patient eyes I remembered from when Thomas and I first bought our land. As I explained everything, his expression shifted from concern to disbelief to quiet anger. "She transferred your property to her company without a full legal signature," he asked, flipping through the documents I had brought. "She forged it," I said simply. "And she's already sold it." He looked up sharply. "Sold it?" I nodded. "I found the realtor's papers in her office." He took a deep breath, then reached for his phone. "All right, we'll fix this. But I need to check something first." He opened his file cabinet and began pulling out folders. Old, worn, labeled in neat handwriting. After a few minutes, he found the one he was looking for. Gray Estate. He laid it flat on the desk and opened it carefully. "These," he said, showing me a set of neatly folded papers, "are the original deeds. Not copies, originals. Signed, notarized, and filed by your husband himself before he passed." I stared at the familiar handwriting, Thomas's strong, looping signature, and felt a lump form in my throat. Mr. Allen smiled, faintly. He was a cautious man. "Your husband. He requested dual notarization on every document. That means any future transfer requires both signatures, his and yours. Since he's passed, that effectively means no one can transfer it without your direct consent." My eyes widened. "So even though she forged my name?" "It doesn't matter," he said firmly. "Without his co-signature, The county can't legally validate it. She filed invalid paperwork. That woman didn't steal your land, Mrs. Gray. She only stole her own time. A sound escaped my throat that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. Relief washed over me so powerfully I had to grip the arm of the chair. Mr. Allen leaned back. We'll file a fraud report immediately and request an injunction on any pending sale. Once that's done, the county registrar will void the transfer. He paused, giving me a small, approving smile. You came just in time. I nodded slowly, breathing for what felt like the first time in weeks. Thank you, Mr. Allen. Don't thank me, he said kindly. Thank your husband. He knew exactly how to protect you. When I left the office, the air outside felt lighter, like the world had shifted ever so slightly back into place. The sun was warm on my face as I waited for the taxi, and I remember thinking, he really did think of everything. That night, Lydia called. I let it ring twice before answering. Margaret, she said, her voice soft but tight with panic. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I smiled to myself. There has. I didn't mean for things to look this way, she continued quickly. I was just trying to make sure your assets were safe. Under your name? I interrupted gently. She went quiet. I could almost hear the blood drain from her face through the silence. Finally, she said, you'll regret this. I let out a small laugh. Maybe, but not as much as you will. And I hung up. By the next morning, everything was in motion. Mr. Allen called to tell me the county had frozen the fraudulent transfer. The deed was reinstated under my name. And Lydia's company, Lydia Properties, LLC, was now flagged for investigation. The news spread quickly through our small town. Whispers followed her wherever she went, about the sweet church lady who had scammed half her friends, about the widow who'd outsmarted her without lifting a finger. I could have felt vindicated, but instead, I felt something else, calm. 2 weeks later, the sheriff knocked on my door. Mrs. Gray, he said, tipping his hat, we'd like a statement from you. Turns out, you weren't her only target. It turned out Lydia had been doing this for years, transferring small properties under her name, forging signatures, using her reputation to get close to lonely, elderly neighbors. My case just happened to be the one that unraveled it all. When they took her in for questioning, she told everyone I'd set her up. But by then, nobody was listening. For years, people had called Lydia kind, generous, a good woman. But I had seen the truth hiding behind that smile, not kindness, but calculation. A week after her arrest, I sat on my porch, sipping tea, watching the sunset over the land Thomas, and I had fought so hard to keep. The wind rustled through the magnolia trees, scattering petals across the grass like confetti. For the first time in months, I felt safe again. Sometimes, I still hear Lydia's voice in my head, saying, you can trust me with the paperwork. And I smile, because she was right, I could trust her. Just not in the way she thought. The morning after Lydia's arrest, the town felt different, quieter, as if everyone was holding their breath. The gossip had spread faster than wildfire. And by the time I stepped out to fetch my mail, Mrs. Henson from across the street was already waiting at her fence, pretending to prune roses that didn't need pruning. Margaret, she called softly, I heard about Lydia. Is it true? I smiled, faintly, tucking the mail under my arm. It's true. She shook her head, her face a mix of pity and disbelief. After all those years of friendship, she sat right in my kitchen last month telling me how she was helping you with your finances. I even told my husband how lucky you were. Lucky, I repeated quietly. Yes, that's what everyone said. Her eyes softened. I'm so sorry. But I wasn't. Not anymore. It's a strange thing, when someone betrays you so deeply, there comes a point where anger burns itself out, and what's left is something colder, sharper. Clarity. In the weeks that followed, I had a lot of that. Mr. Allen helped me secure every document, every piece of property Lydia had tried to claim. She had done this to 3 others in town, an old couple she met through church, and a widower with early dementia. They came forward after hearing what happened to me. We met one afternoon at the local cafe. I'll never forget the look in their eyes, that mix of shame and relief, the kind only people who've been deceived can understand. We sat together for hours, not talking about revenge, but about what we'd do next, about how to make sure no one else ever fell for the same trap. That's when I got the idea. Thomas and I had bought a small patch of land on the edge of town decades ago. It was too rocky for crops, too uneven for building, and we'd always joked it would be our retirement garden, the place we'd grow old planting tomatoes and daisies. It had sat unused for years, just a stretch of wild grass and memory. Now, I saw something new in it. I decided to donate it, not to a company, not to a friend, but to the town itself. A community space. A garden for anyone who needed a place to breathe, to heal, to grow something of their own. When I told Mr. Allen, he smiled and said, "You could call it anything you want. It's yours again, after all." So I named it Grey Haven. Within weeks, volunteers came. The widower brought his old gardening tools. The couple from church painted benches and planted roses. Even the mayor stopped by to see what we were doing. By summer, the field that had once been wild and forgotten was filled with rows of green, tomatoes, peppers, and marigolds that danced in the breeze. The local paper ran a story about it. Grey Haven, a place to grow again. They asked me for a quote, and all I said was, "It's never too late to plant something new after someone tries to take everything away." One afternoon, as I sat on a wooden bench watching children run between the rows, I saw a familiar figure on the sidewalk, Richard, the sheriff's deputy. He took off his hat and approached me gently. "Mrs. Gray," he said, "I thought you'd want to know, Lydia pleaded guilty." I didn't move. How long? 3 years, maybe less. Fraud and forgery. The other she took advantage of wanted leniency. I nodded slowly. Good. Let her have time to think. He hesitated, then said softly, "You know, she keeps telling people she was just trying to protect you." I looked out across the garden, at the laughter, at the sunlight spilling through the trees. "Maybe she was," I said finally, "just not in the way she thinks." He smiled, tipped his hat, and left me there, surrounded by the hum of life returning. Sometimes, when I'm watering the flowers, I think about her, not with anger. That part of me has gone quiet, but with a strange sort of pity. Because Lydia never understood what I did. That wealth isn't measured in deeds or land or names on paper. It's in peace, in dignity, in the ability to look at your reflection and know you didn't let someone else define your worth. I see that now more clearly than ever. The garden became more than I expected. Neighbors who barely spoke before started showing up with shovels and seeds. One woman, a young mother new to town, told me it was the first place she'd felt safe in months. She called it a sanctuary. I think Thomas would have liked that. At sunset, when the light hits the magnolia tree just right and the petals fall like snow, I sometimes imagine him sitting beside me, smiling, pipe in hand, saying what he always used to when life got hard. "You can't stop people from being who they are, Margaret, but you can decide what grows from it." He was right. I couldn't stop Lydia from being who she was, but I could choose what came next. And what came next was peace, the kind that can't be stolen, signed away, or forged. The kind you earn by surviving. If you've ever trusted the wrong person, and it cost you something dear, remember this: betrayal doesn't make you weak. It means your heart was kind enough to believe. And sometimes, that belief, once broken, becomes your greatest strength. If you've lived a story like this, or know someone who has, share it in the comments below. Your story might help someone see the truth a little sooner.